You're listening to the Imperfect Leader Podcast. This podcast is designed for imperfect leaders. We discuss mental and emotional health, leading effectively, spiritual growth, and what following Jesus in today's world looks like. I'm Scott Neal, your host. Before we get into this episode, please take just a second, give us a rating, and leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening. It is the best gift you can give to us. Now, let's get into this episode. And remember, nothing succeeds like imperfection. Today, I have my friend Cerissa Rhodes with us. I'm excited about introducing her to you and getting a chance to get to know a little bit more about her. Cerissa, welcome to the Imperfect Leader Podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad that you are with us today. I want to introduce you to the audience and get them a chance to know a little bit more who you are. So let's begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, from where's home, a little bit about your family, and how did you get to Elizabeth City, North Carolina?
All right. So I am married to Matt Rhodes, and he's in the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up in Washington State, and I went to college in Sitka, Alaska. And I met him while I was working there after graduating. And then we moved here. Well, no, that skips a whole bunch. Yeah. So I met him in Alaska, and we got back together while he was living in Hawaii.
Okay. So you've been home is Washington State.
Yes.
You've lived in Alaska and Hawaii, and now you're in Elizabeth City.
Yes. And I actually lived in Oregon State for a year doing AmeriCorps Vista.
Wow.
Prior to Hawaii.
Right. Now, how long have you guys been together?
It'll be 10 years married in July.
Okay. So all that move is over how many years?
Let's see. Well, for about 15.
15 years.
But a lot of those moves were on my own.
Okay.
The Alaska and Oregon was on my own. So we've been together about 12 years.
Okay, great. Well, that's a lot of different places to live, Alaska, Hawaii, and Elizabeth City. So I would ask you which one is your favorite, but I doubt you would say Elizabeth City out of all those places you've lived. Yeah.
But it won't be Hawaii either, which should be shocking.
Hawaii, really?
No.
So where is your favorite place?
Out of all the places I lived would be Sitka, Alaska.
Oh, really?
I loved it there.
Yeah. I talk to a lot of people because, we live in a Coast Guard town, and many of them have come through Alaska or on their way to Alaska, and it's one of those love or hate. I've talked to some families, they love Alaska, they want to go back. And I've talked to some other families, like, I'm so glad that trip's over, that tour is over there, so I don't have to be there anymore. So you happen to be one of those people who love Alaska.
Yes,
yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. Is it because of the outdoors and fishing and all the different things, or is it the people, the community, what?
My family has always kind of been connected to Alaska. Like, I have family in the mainland part of Alaska, so I had been there before. Southeast is gorgeous, but I think the big thing is that I'm one of those people that my world totally opened up when I went to college.
Okay.
And so I had so much life change and so much just finding myself there with those people in that community.
That's great. I've heard that's a very tight-knit community there too.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're there, you make friends easily, and everybody kind of looking after one another and helping with kids and all the different things that go with that. So that's very good. Well, now you came to Forest Park. You have a unique story in coming here, how I got a chance to get to know you. So tell us a bit about how you came to find Forest Park and why you started attending here and why you're still here.
So a friend of mine who's also Coast Guard had said that they heard about this church and they wanted to come. At first I was kind of afraid because I always assume everybody else is more Christian than I am.
Okay.
So I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but okay, we'll go.
Right.
And immediately what I liked was the music. I don't think I'd ever been somewhere that had kind of the live music that we
what
have.
kind of background did you have, though, growing up in church? Did you go to church at all as a child, or what?
I went with my grandma Saturday night to the Episcopal church.
Okay.
So very classic. There wasn't any music Saturday night. And then I would go off and on to different Foursquare churches with my friends, never consistently.
And all this is in Washington State?
That was all in Washington State. In Alaska, I had gone to different churches. There was a group of us that one of us was Mormon, one was Catholic. I had the background Episcopalian. There was a Presbyterian, and we kind of skipped around and visited different churches. And then I had gone to a Unitarian church in Oregon. And there was a period of time after going to a Easter service in the Catholic Church that I'd been questioning the Christianity for a long time, not belief in God or belief in Jesus, but like the community.
Right.
For a while. And that particular service kind of sealed the deal for me. And I decided I wasn't going to go back to a church that didn't accept every single one of my friends, or that when I went in, I felt guilty for being there.
Wow.
And so that was...
So obviously some of your experiences at different churches made you feel that way.
Yes.
And excluded some of your friends and made you feel somewhat, either maybe or maybe not, you would be accepted. So you weren't sure.
Yes.
Okay. And this particular church you went to there in Washington State was a good experience for you, or that day sealed the deal, you're never going back?
It was an Easter service in Alaska.
Oh, that's right, Alaska.
And they had used the opportunity to kind of judge the people that only go on holidays.
Oh, okay.
And so it was one of those, all right, then we sat there it was a 45-minute lecture,
right, on
only coming on holidays. And not once did they talk about the Easter story. And that kind of sealed the deal. Like, right. All right.
So you walked out that day and said, okay, I don't think I'm going to do this again.
Yeah.
How long was it after that you decided to give it a shot again?
It was, I went to the Unitarian church after that. That was very, very different for me. It was a great group of people, and we connected on a social justice level, but it was very, very unique to what I was used to. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't try anything else until I came to Forest Park.
Wow. Okay. So that was a number of years.
Yeah.
Okay. And your friend asked you to come here, and you were hesitant to come, but you decided to show up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't believe she had been here before either. I think it was also her first weekend.
So you were, what were you feeling walking in?
It's funny because the parts I don't like about church are whenever I go to a less traditional church, I feel uncomfortable about. So when we walked in, one, I was afraid I wouldn't fit in, but then also like when there wasn't standing, there wasn't kneeling, there wasn't the peace, there wasn't communion. Right. For a very long time, it didn't feel like church.
Right.
There wasn't anything I didn't like, but it didn't feel like going to church for a long time.
So some of those elements were missing, and it somewhat felt a little awkward to you because what you had grown up expecting church to be is not necessarily what you found here.
Yes.
Okay. But something compelled you to come back. So you enjoyed the music. Mm-hmm. You liked some of the people you met. You felt comfortable, and you came back. Yeah.
And my favorite part was that the messages can be connected to life. Mm-hmm. Like they are very practical. I never experienced that at any church.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I talked to someone last weekend at the end of the message, and they were telling me that their experience in church in the past, even though they liked many of the services they had attended in other places in the country, they didn't necessarily know what to do with the message. It explained a few things from Scripture, gave them a little history or something, but they didn't know how to put that into practice Monday. They didn't know what to do with it the rest of the week. And then when you come back the next Sunday and it's the same thing, and the next Sunday the same thing, then over a period of months you hear a lot of bits and pieces of information from Scripture, but no idea what to do with it. And one of the things they've enjoyed here, is that they can take it out and put it into practice, whether it's in their marriage or their job or with their children or just in their own mental health or, whatever. And that was encouraging to me, because that's what I want. I want to take a lot of that out of the rafters, sometimes I'll say, and put it there on your lap and say, okay, you don't have to necessarily agree with this. You don't necessarily have to embrace all of it, but here are some things that you can put into practice right now, and hopefully it'll improve a few things going on in your life. And my hope is eventually, as they put the puzzle together, they also discover that there's someone behind all of that, and that's God, and that Christianity is true. So that's great. So how long have you been here to Forest Park now? I don't even really know.
About 6 years.
6 years. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you said yes that day that you came, and now you're part of a couple groups that my wife and I, Lana and I, are in, and we just enjoy your friendship and enjoyed get to know you. So let me jump to kind of what you do, and one of the main reasons I wanted to sit down with you, because what you do on a daily basis to me is just so interesting. So tell us where you work right now and what you do.
Okay. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm at Pride in North Carolina. So it's community mental health. I provide outpatient therapy for people of all ages. My favorite and kind of my specialty is kids with trauma.
Okay. Now explain to our audience what would be considered trauma. I think a lot of times when people hear the word trauma, because of maybe what they've seen, on television or in movies, they assume that is a major accident or something horrendous has happened to in a person's life. But one of the things that you've opened me up to just in our discussions is that's not necessarily how you can define trauma that way, but it's not a full definition of trauma. So give me some illustrations or something of what maybe a child might actually go through that other people may not consider traumatic, but it actually is.
No, that's a really great point. And I always explain that it's kind of a therapeutic definition of trauma.
Okay.
So the way that I explain trauma, especially to the kids, is it's anything that was really upsetting that changes the way you thought of the world. And so like a classic example would be two people could be in a car, two people, car accident, one gets hurt, one doesn't. Even the one that gets hurt, if they can get up, get in the car the next day, go to work, they did not experience trauma. The passenger maybe that did not get hurt, but now feels that cars are dangerous. They struggle to get into the car. They're slamming on their brakes when another car approaches for no reason. That person experienced trauma. So it's not necessarily what happened, it's what we do with what happened.
Okay, so some events are traumatic to some people and not traumatic to other people.
Yes.
And that's often why, I hear, some parents might say to their children, get over it. I did the same thing when I was a kid and I was fine. What's your problem kind of thing? Almost like they can make a choice to just snap out of it, but maybe this child is experiencing the same thing that the parent experienced when the parent was much younger, but they're perceiving it completely differently. And they're experiencing residual effects of that particular event.
Yes.
That's much different than the parent.
It's very much more about how the child is thinking or how the person is thinking about the event.
Now, is that because of how that person is kind of wired together? Is it their personality or just like, why is it that two people can be in the car? I know we can't possibly answer it fully, but a little bit of perspective. Why is it two people can be in a car? They have an accident. One is fine emotionally, overall is fine. The other one, this is a traumatic event and alters their perception.
It really goes to resilience, how resilient a person is. Are they naturally anxious? Do they already have some thought distortions? Like, do they already see the world as dangerous or as something to be worried about? Or did they see the world as so perfect that now everything has shifted? Okay.
That's a great insight there. So some people see the world as a very safe place. And so this could come from a wonderful childhood.
Oh, yes.
They've been loved. So it doesn't mean that if someone is experiencing some of the residual effects of this event, that it's because they're unhealthy or mentally unstable. They could have had a wonderful childhood. Everything in their life has gone well, and they get into an accident or someone does something to them that breaks them. Now their world was ideal prior to this event, and now this event has caused, a change in their perception of the way reality works.
Yes, I would almost say I see more people that have had several traumas, but I would say the person that has had kind of this idealistic, perfect life and then has something major, that person is more likely to have trauma at the littlest thing. Like that's almost a scary way to live because then there is no resilience built.
Okay. So a child who has grown up in a wonderful family, been taken care of his or her entire life, because they've had life pretty good and they've experienced a pretty good life, they have not had a chance to build up some resilience. So when this event occurs in their life, it really spins them out of control sometimes because they've not built it up.
Yeah, they may not have the coping skills at all to put it together. Or
now you say you typically see someone after they've gone through a few traumatic events.
Oftentimes
why is that?
It's several. I think it's because, one, so many people experience several traumas in life.
Okay.
It could be when they're coming, like if it's an adult, generally there's significant traumas that have occurred in their life. But even children, a lot of times will come in and it's just trauma after trauma. It's, maybe mom and dad, were fighting. And so the child witnessed domestic violence, but then mom got sick. So now that's scary because mom got sick. And then, something happened. Like it just kind of goes on from there.
Yeah. What is a typical, what are a few common traumatic things that you see coming into your office pretty consistently?
I would say witnessing domestic violence is huge. Sexual abuse is beyond common.
Okay.
For children and adults.
Now, the adults, meaning that they were sexually abused as a child, or they're just now dealing with it?
Yes.
Okay, that's very common. If you had to put a percentage on that, what would you say? Not necessarily the percentage of people who come in your office, but I'm curious to know what you would say the percentage of people within our country who've probably been sexually abused. Well, how high do you think that is?
They say it's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. I would say it's significantly higher because
significantly higher, double.
Probably. I mean, it's unreal how many people will come in and say they've never told a soul.
Wow.
And so those statistics are only met on the people that have disclosed and that have been reported somewhere for it to be documented.
And these are adults mainly who come in and say, I've never told anyone. Okay. And this typically happens, any idea on what age bracket you often see sexual abuse happening?
The abuse happening?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, it's usually young.
Young.
I think it would be shocking to know how many times it happens under the age of 5, but definitely childhood in general.
Okay, now under the age of 5, I would imagine many of them do not have a clear recollection of exactly what occurred.
It would more be implicit memory. So they might remember scents, sounds, smells, feeling out of control, lots of confusion, potentially pain. Yeah.
And they don't know why, right?
Correct.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I remember you and I and our group was actually talking about this, I think it was last week or so, and you mentioned something I found very interesting, and that is even in birth trauma, which I'd like to get to in a moment, but that child has no recollection of this particular traumatic event. However, that traumatic event is affecting them in their life. So you have a child that has been sexually abused at 4. I look back on my life. I can't remember much. 4 is probably going to be about the first reasonably good memory I have of anything going on in my life. And I'll have a little flash here and a little flash there. But just because that child cannot remember molestation or something that occurred at 3, you may not have the memory, right? That a clear memory, but yet your body remembers that. So you can have some effects. Explain a little bit of that. I just find this interesting. At
3 or 4, you would have more of a memory. The idea is if you didn't have words when it happened, so if you weren't speaking yet or you had a speech impediment, you won't be able to explain it as a memory. Your body will remember the pieces of it.
Okay.
Once you're able to talk, then you connect it to words.
Okay.
Which is kind of odd to think about. But because when you're very young, there's no words to connect it to.
Okay.
But what they might remember is a cologne.
Right.
So then later, when all of a sudden they're in the room with somebody wearing that same cologne, they may not know why, but they can't sit still. They're very angry. They're doing things and nobody understands why. Or that same person.
So they could get, so let me set this up to make sure I understand it. So this person could have been sexually abused by this adult, and the child has no clear memory of this particular adult doing anything to them, but they just notice maybe some nervousness or some anxiety when they're a teenager or even a young adult around this particular person or someone else who wears that person's cologne, or maybe you go back to the house that it occurred in and they don't know why they feel anxiety or fear or whatever. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, like they very likely will not want to have anything to do with that person, but maybe won't be able to tell a parent why.
So they have no idea how to explain what's going on, but yet something traumatic has occurred. Okay. And I would imagine that those traumatic events, this trauma that this child experienced at 2 or 3 or whatever, there are some coping things that they try to get into, maybe even as a teenager, to calm that anxiety down, which only leads to more problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I don't completely understand this part, but I think that's why a lot of times with sexual abuse, you see heightened sexual activity. And I think it has to do with confusion and trying to figure out the whole act of what happened and why it happened. And
so everything, would this be accurate? I want to make sure I'm accurate. Everything that happens to a person from the time they're born onward, it is in their mind. It is lodged there somewhere. They may not have the ability to communicate that, but does it affect them?
I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know that everything is. I think everything that has an impact at the time it happened.
Okay. I'm just wondering if a child goes through something at 1 or 2, does that affect the rest of their life?
It could.
Okay. Depending on how traumatic the event or whatever.
How traumatic it was to them, yeah.
Okay.
And that's why, this goes all the way back to like Erickson's stages of development. Mm-hmm. And so if a child doesn't learn to develop trust at the time that they're supposed to develop trust, they will likely struggle with that throughout their life. Now, of course, they can get help and they can work on that, but that will be a struggle.
Let's zero in on that. At what age is that when they're developing trust?
I want to say that's our very first stage. So that's like infancy to like 1 or 2. Okay,
so if in the infancy stage up to the age of 2, there's not a lot of trust built, there's a lot of disappointment, could be mom could be moving in with different men, or man moving in with different women, or moving homes, or lots of yelling or fighting or whatever going on in the home, and the child never feels at peace, never feels secure. Now let's say that life kind of calms down at 4 or 5 and everything in that child's life seems pretty good. They could still struggle with trust?
They don't necessarily, it's not a guarantee that they will, but yeah, they could.
They could.
That goes back to personality and resilience.
That goes back to what you said before, depending on how resilient the child is.
Mm-hmm. That's why it's so important in those first several months, the attachment piece. Mm-hmm. Attachment and trauma are very connected. When they cry, were they picked up? When they were hungry, were they fed? When they were cold. And there's a strong connection, and it's kind of accidental. But when people don't realize with little ones with hearing loss or ear infections when they're very young, sometimes they will have a hard time struggling with trust because nobody caught on to what was going on, and that need wasn't satisfied quickly. Okay. If that makes sense. So sometimes there's a connection to just very random things. And so that's, that would be did they have a lot of ear infections when they were little? Right. Did they have to have ear tubes?
Right. So someone in their 30s struggling with, lack of trust or, insecurity or whatever, we're certainly not saying that something traumatic happened in their life, but it is possible that something happened during those early stages of development and they have no memory of that, but yet during that key developmental stage of life, they were, the nutrition, if you will, was denied them in their psychological development, their brain development. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that could be a huge part of it. Yeah. And then, it gets kind of more complicated too, because as an adult or as an adolescent, when you actually do have a working, a memory, you can talk about it and stuff, our brains will also protect us. And so something could happen and your brain is blocking the memory. So once you get older, then could be that complication as well.
So your brain could actually block the memory of something that occurred when you were a child?
Or as an adult, either one.
Really? Mm-hmm. And that is a defense mechanism?
That's a defense mechanism.
A safety kind of a way of kind of locking that away?
Your brain's protecting you.
Okay. But you still have some of the effects of that though, correct?
Yes. Often people will know there's something that they're not remembering.
Yeah. Have you had within your career a few cases where someone may have been struggling with daily anxiety or certain fears or whatever, and then through the therapy and through the counseling uncovered some things that they did not know about, and then it became clear?
Yes. I've also had people that have just never connected. Like they had the memory.
Okay.
Like I have a really big example I'll never forget. I had a woman come in that very anxious, like not functioning in life at all because of the anxiety. But she had a horrific trauma at the age of 6.
Okay.
She witnessed her cousin be hit by a car while they were holding hands.
Oh, goodness.
And never from the age of 6 to, mid-adult, never connected her anxiety to what happened when she was 6 and never had therapy as a child.
So she just thought that was just an event that occurred and that was a terrible thing. But what she's going through today has nothing to do with that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I would say that's pretty common.
Yeah.
No, I'm fine. I just have anxiety.
Right.
Which
and do you think I know a little bit about that because there are some things that I've had to go through, and anyone who is part of Forest Park or has listened to some of the messages that I bring, I share some about my childhood and some of the insecurities and things, and it definitely took me a while to admit, and I use the word admit because that's how it actually felt, that I admitted that a few of the things was going through in my 30s and 40s, they were related to what I went through at 6, 7, and 8 years of age. I don't know why it's so hard for us. Like I said, I had to admit that. It was almost like I had to humble myself and say, yes, those things affected me. I don't know if it was because I wanted to appear stronger, than I actually was, or I got over that stuff when I was a kid. I'm fine. What would you say? Why do we struggle with connecting the dots, if you will?
I think there's so many reasons. One reason is I think we naturally want to protect our family.
Oh.
And so if we admit that this happened, we're afraid that somebody may judge our family.
Okay.
I also think like that strong piece, that was your norm. It's people's norm. And so later to admit that that wasn't actually a normal event
right
makes you vulnerable, What else did I experience? Because at the time, you probably did feel okay with it.
Yep.
You worked through it.
Yeah. That was definitely true. When I remember when I was first married, my wife Lana, had a wonderful childhood and lived in the same community, went to the same school system. Mom and dad still married today, close to 60 years. And I wanted to protect my childhood. She would ask me certain questions and I would answer them, but my immediate attitude was somewhat of a defense. Well, my mom did the best she could, or, we were a good family. I had a good childhood, but I was struggling with depression. I was struggling with anxiety. I was struggling with a variety of things, but somehow I separated my childhood from that. And I didn't want to, you're right. I didn't want to blame my mom. I mean, she did the best she could, that kind of thing. And coming to the realization that it's all connected, that it really was an epiphany for me. And then I felt free to then talk about the pain of childhood or disappointment in my family. It was a hard journey. And I would imagine there's a lot of people listening that, that maybe they haven't connected the dots, or maybe they're just now in the process of putting all that together. And that's one of the reasons why counseling is so helpful.
To help put that.
Yeah.
I'm totally a person on the outside. And so I'm making those connections as people are sharing them. But for the person, that's just experiences they've lived. That's just their history.
Right. So they're in it and can't really see it from the outside. You're a little bit higher up, almost kind of, the cliche we've heard before, you can't see the forest for the trees. So this person who's lived it, this woman who maybe, or man who hurt them, they see them as mom. They see them as dad. You see them as a woman who hurt you, right? A man who hurt you. So you can somewhat connect these things and draw this overall picture for this person that the person can't, the person sitting in your office can't necessarily draw that same picture.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of people sitting in the counseling office with those epiphanies. It finally clicks. It finally dawns on them. That makes sense.
And a lot of people come in and they don't want to tell you anything about their childhood. I want to talk about today because I just want to I want to be able to go to work and not get in trouble with my boss.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with my childhood.
Now, is that because of what we just said? They're trying to protect?
I believe so, or they just don't want to go there, or it's too painful. I don't need to talk about that. Just, I want to handle this.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that's very true. With me, you know, it was difficult because I had to relive a few things, you know, that I had kind of filed away. You know, I put them in the closet, closed the door, you know, been there, done that, dealt with it. Now just help me where I am right now, because I'm okay, you know. And I had to go back and open those closets, and I had to revisit some people that I didn't necessarily like. And I had to admit that some of the people I didn't necessarily like, actually, I still carry them with me. They're still part of my life. That was, I guess, where when I said that I had to humble myself. You know, I had to admit that maybe I wasn't as strong as I thought I was as a teenager or as a young adult. You know, maybe they affected me more than I wanted to admit.
And that makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, very uncomfortable. Yeah, because for me, like I said, I kind of closed that part of my life and moved on. And then here I am in my 30s and 40s having to reopen some things, you know, and that was that brought some pain. It really did. But I tell you what, it also brought a lot of freedom, because I was able to name some things.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know what to call it. And then when I finally could call it for what it was, you know, that helped.
We actually do that with our kids a lot. Name your worries, name your, just the idea. That's a good point. You mentioned that, like, just to be able to name something.
Now tell me what you mean by with your kids. Like what do you, I assume that's some practical tools you give to parents.
Yes.
Help your child do this or do that.
Like name their worry or connect it to them, connect their stomach ache and not wanting to go to school with the fact that they're worried about where mom is when they're at school.
Okay. So it's not just a stomach ache.
Help them name it. Help them. Right. Yes. Yeah.
So you're teaching them this very deep self-awareness. Know yourself. Know why you feel the way you feel.
Absolutely.
Right. So okay, let's get very practical. What would you do with the child who seems to be just, all children, I shouldn't say all children, but most children have some level of fear of the dark or what's under the bed. But what if you have a child who's exceptionally afraid and having a difficult time sleeping, or how would you help the parent help the child name what they're afraid of, etc.?
Asking questions, telling them, especially when you ask questions, doing it in a way that doesn't make them have to name the fact that they are scared, but they're feeling fear. There's a big difference in that.
Okay.
Because a lot of kids will say, oh, I feel fear, or I feel scared, but I'm not scared, which is interesting. But to the child, to say I'm scared sounds like people will make fun of them.
Okay.
To say I feel that way is different.
Because the feeling is somewhat separate from them? Is that why?
Yeah.
Okay.
But also just asking, like, what are you thinking? When you're in the dark, what are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking what's in my closet.
Okay.
And so helping them to understand that that's the thought that's making them scared and not the dark. A lot of fear comes from our thoughts. And so helping them realize that depending on how scared they are, really traditional, kind of things that you read on Facebook are helpful, kind of like monster spray and things that give them the power because they are still in that imaginative stage as well. But definitely when it becomes where they're not sleeping, where they're not going to go to school,
right? Then
it's more helping them remember times that they did sleep and everything was okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I like that line you just mentioned about they're still in the imaginative stage. So you don't want to take away all their imagination.
No.
So we certainly, as a parent, do not want to rob them of all of their fantasies and dreams and imagine. I think that's extremely important. You want to honor that and somewhat allow them to still live in that imaginative world, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So you don't want to rob that, because that's some of the magic and the beauty of being a child. But yet you want to give them, somewhat put them in the driver's seat rather than their emotions being in the driver's seat. So they control their emotions, or at least name them. And when you name them, you feel a little bit more in control.
Absolutely.
Right. They're not standing over you. You're standing over them. And you're saying, I know what you are. You are fear, right?
We actually, that's interesting that you talked about that. In trauma therapy, we call the trauma a bully. And the bully starts out.
You call trauma a bully.
Yes.
Okay, so you name trauma, you put it out almost like a person.
Yes.
Okay.
It says bully. And it starts out huge.
Okay.
The more we talk about the bully, though, the smaller and smaller it gets. And eventually you can put that bully in your pocket. And nobody's afraid of something so small they can put in their pocket.
Right.
And so that's kind of how,
So now how I see that is you're helping the child become empowered and strong and in charge of the bully rather than the bully being in charge of them.
Yes.
Okay. And see, that is just so key to learn that early. I mean, I just can't even imagine had that happened to me when I was, 6, 7, 8, especially in the probably about a 4-year period of my life, probably from 6 to about 10. I would say that 4-year period. We moved a lot. My parents were going through their own, issues in marriage. My mom got remarried, and we moved and all those different things. Boy, I had a lot of fears. I had a lot of insecurities, and I didn't know who to trust, and on it went. Had someone been able to sit down with me at that age, because I was somewhat of an inquisitive child and intelligent, and I could comprehend things, and just help me put that bully in my pocket. I cannot even imagine what that would have done for me when I hit high school, when I went to college, when I started to get in life, because you don't just automatically become self-aware because you get older.
No.
People say, well, surely by the time you're in college, you can put the bully in your pocket by yourself. That's not true at all. If you've never learned those skills, you've never learned those skills. Isn't that correct? You don't automatically learn them.
No, that's absolutely correct. And I think when we look at anger, that's the biggest thing. And I work with parents a lot on that, is that oftentimes kids get punished for being angry. I don't think a parent realizes they're doing it, but like the child stomps off or throws something or breaks something, and they get in trouble for stomping off or breaking it, but nobody teaches them what to do instead.
Okay.
What do you do when you're angry? Because
anger is a legitimate emotion.
Yes.
You want your child to get angry, just in control of the anger, angry maybe over the right things rather than the wrong things. So you just get angry with your child for getting angry, or you punish your child, and they never learn what to do with all these emotions, right?
And then they are going to college, and now they're throwing bigger things. Or now they're, punching the wall because
so the
they
temper
never
tantrum
learned.
only gets just somewhat more adult-like, but it's still a temper tantrum.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would imagine you see adults who are sitting in a 40-year-old body, but in a lot of ways emotionally they're a child, they're an adolescent. Yeah. Because
they just
never
learned.
learned. Wow. Which leads to marital problems, which leads to addictive. Now they're old enough to buy alcohol and they have the ability to get drugs or whatever. And their security blanket is just more expensive and more dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. Wow. Well, I could talk to you about that for a long time, because I just find all of that fascinating. What's a major challenge you have maybe in your career, in your line of work as a social worker in counseling? What's kind of a constant barrier or maybe an obstacle? Is it, for instance, is it getting parents to bring their children in, or for them to carry these things out when they get back home, or an acceptance in our society of mental health issues? Just what are a few of those things that just frustrate you, kind of it's a rock in your shoe at times?
Kind of all the above. I would definitely say that there's a lot of times that that parents kind of bring us a kid and want them quote unquote fixed. And that's frustrating because one, the kid's not broken.
Okay.
But also the parent probably has just as much work to do as the child.
Okay.
And that's really in any family.
Yeah.
Like there's just things that you could work on as well. And sometimes that's really hard to get parents on board with.
So the parent wants to just kind of like drop the kid off, not literally, but maybe even that. They literally come and drop the child off and go somewhere else. And they want you to fix them. So they pick them back up, kind of like I dropped my computer off, it was fixed, I pick it up, and now the child's going to behave at home or whatever.
Yes.
And they don't see their own part. The parent doesn't see their part in the problems this child's experiencing.
Exactly. And some of that challenge too sometimes trickles into sometimes it can be very challenging to get a parent to see a symptom to see a behavior as a symptom. That can be very challenging too. And until we can see the behavior as a symptom, it doesn't get treated right at home. And it's very accidental. But often kids get punished for things that they maybe don't have yet the skill to not do.
Okay.
And that can also that kind of goes hand in hand with the parent involvement, is also getting parents really on board with the child's behavior and understanding it and how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Something you said there too, I'd like to get your insight on. You said the child's not broken. At Forest Park, we use that phrase a lot. We have people are broken, and we're here to help repair people and fix people. I certainly know, I shouldn't say I know, but I think I understand what I mean by that when I say it. But I have been curious what, a therapist or a counselor would say, are there broken people? Do you not see them as broken? Or how would you word that? Because I'd like to learn a better way maybe of even saying that. Do you just say they're not broken as children, but they are broken as adults? Kind of, what's your insight on that?
That makes me laugh only because I was thinking that exact thing. Like it hurts my soul for somebody to say that a child is broken.
Okay. All right.
Because they're not broken. They need to learn new skills, but I guess that would be true of the adult as well.
Right. That's what I want to know. Do you see adults as broken, or they just don't know? They just or is there a point that they cross a line? Because we see people who do horrendous things, and abuse children, or they destroy their husband or their wife multiple times, and it's is that a broken person? Is that person shattered, or is it just still a lack of knowledge, or how do you see that?
I have this philosophy that I can't think too much about because I'll get really frustrated, but I really have a very strong philosophy, and I very much believe that all people are good people.
Okay.
But that some people make really poor choices in getting their needs met.
Okay.
And our needs, we learn how to, meet our needs based on our experiences. So even horrific things, obviously, we need consequences, we need all this kind of stuff, but that person is doing that for a reason. Mm-hmm. Even if it's that person is a sociopath or a psychopath, then there's a mental illness. Okay. That's still the reason.
Right.
Or it's not that, it's that they don't have resources to have another way. And so we need to teach them.
And I just, in ministry and in interacting with hundreds, possibly thousands of people throughout the years, I have seen so many, the domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
And what you often see, when I say you, I mean people in general will often see the almost last domino that falls, but you don't really know what kicked that off. And it could have been something when they were a child or as a teenager or whatever. And if you could somehow roll back time and go back before that first domino fell in that person's life, you would see, in many cases, I'm sure there are exceptions to this. I don't know. I don't have that kind of knowledge, obviously. But I would think that the majority of people, that child was a sweet child and wanted the best out of life and cared about people and etc. But then a few events began to occur, and they made some decisions that were probably poor because they didn't have the skills or whatever, and it began this falling of dominoes in this child's life. And here they are now. Their marriage is blown up. They're an addict because of a variety of different reasons, or whatever, or homeless. They're on the streets. I'm blown away by some of the stories of people who are homeless, and then you find out it was just a few years ago they had a thriving life and everything was beautiful, but a few things happened.
I think what I hear more than broken is when people come in, they'll either say, I am crazy, or I'm not crazy, or don't think I'm crazy. Like, it's the crazy aspect that I get a lot. And then explaining, that like look at what you've lived through, or look at what's happened, or look at what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
that you were responding.
Let me ask you this. Someone listening to this podcast may have a child or a young teenager or whatever, and they don't know, is my child normal, quote unquote, or do I need to take them in, to a therapist or a counselor? What are a few signs, some things that you would say to this parent? Okay, look for this, because there are some things that are somewhat within the realm of normal as this child's going through hormonal changes and trying to figure out their own way in life, and they're okay, they're within that bracket. But there are some other things that you would say, all right, if you see these behaviors, you probably need to make a call. What would you say?
That's a great question. The simple answer is when whatever is happening, the behavior, the symptom is interfering with their daily life, that's the time.
Okay.
What does that mean? Practically, it's very different for everybody. If your kid is honestly not sleeping, sleep is huge with mental health. That might be a time.
Okay.
Accidents, repeated nightmares, things like just being angry and aggressive repeatedly, things like that. With the older kids, talking about self-harm obviously would be a good reason to bring somebody in. I also always caution for parents as much as possible, because I know they're freaking out when that happens, to be calm, because that self-harm is a subject that it's an unhelpful coping skill, and it often gets labeled as suicidal behaviors, which gets scary. So absolutely, that's a time to maybe get them some help, but it's not maybe as scary as a parent.
Okay, so
fears.
Is it correct to say that just because a child is engaging in self-harm does not mean they're suicidal?
Correct.
Okay.
In fact, I would say the majority are not suicidal.
Yeah, I know that's an entire, very deep subject on self-harm, but just kind of what's the main reason, or maybe a reason that a child does that? Is it for attention, or is it because they're hurting on the inside and they're
It's a coping skill. Like, the best I can explain it, and of course it's totally depends on content.
Sure.
There's, it's multifaceted, but in my head, it's no different than the parent that smokes, in the sense that it's unhealthy. That it could give you cancer. All these things. But when you get stressed, or when life feels out of control, or you just yelled at your kid and you didn't mean to, you go and smoke.
Okay.
That's what somebody that's self-harming is doing. It could be immediately more dangerous, but it's a coping skill that somehow they got into, and it took the stress away for a moment.
Well,
and
that would certainly be eye-opening to many parents if they would accept that, because they in essence, they're self-harming just in a much slower and more acceptable way in order to cope in life. But if they see their child cut themselves or whatever it is they choose to do, it's immediate 911, every bell goes off, every whistle, but yet this child is just doing what he or she can do to cope in some ways with life, as maybe even the parent has provided for them.
Yes.
Yeah. So that goes back to you saying they bring them in, hey, fix my child, but they don't want to necessarily deal with all the things in their own life that has possibly led this child to this place.
Yeah. That's and that definitely is, a sign that they need help, but potentially not the time to call 911.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, let me ask you this, a few more personal questions here. We'll kind of jump off that and go in a little different direction. What would you like to eventually see happen in your career? How long have you been doing this, by the way, before I get to that?
I've been licensed for 4 years.
Okay.
I've been in the helping field really since I graduated.
All right. So where would you like to see this eventually go? What's a passion of yours or desire of yours to be fulfilled?
I would really I have some specialized training with kids. Mm-hmm. I would love to have more specialized training with trauma in adults.
Okay.
I would love to learn some EMDR and just be really proficient in some evidence-based things with the adult population. Mm-hmm. I work with a lot of adults, but just something more specific.
Right.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that's great. And is that obviously it's a needed area?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so that's an area that is just not, because it seems like there's a lot of counseling for adults. I mean, everywhere I turn, there seems to be a lot of that.
But
not as many for children, or is it the trauma aspect of it?
I would say there's much more people that will see adolescents up in general everywhere. Okay. Very few will, like one of my trainings allows me to see 0 to 6. I mean, that's a very special population.
Yeah.
But there's not a whole lot of therapists that are necessarily certified in things like EMDR or certified in specific models for treating trauma with adults. And there's more than EMDR. That's just one that I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah. And what exactly is that again?
So that's eye movement desensitization.
Right.
It's a form of trauma therapy that's amazing with PTSD.
Okay.
In a lot of cases, you can treat the trauma without the person having to disclose what happened.
Wow.
Which is phenomenal because that's a huge barrier. They don't want to talk about it.
Really? Okay, that opens a whole other thing. So they're going through, obviously they're experiencing some negative fallout of whatever it is they went through. They know what they went through, but they don't want to talk about it.
Correct.
Okay. Now I would imagine that would be some pretty horrendous things that they're trying to not relive or not disclose because of getting people in trouble, or
it could be anything. Yeah.
Very interesting. All right. Well, I could walk down that road now for a while, so we'll wrap that up though before we get into that. Well, let me ask you a few personal questions about you, and I'll kind of go through these quickly before we finish up the interview. What's a favorite movie of Cerissa's? What do you enjoy?
I haven't seen it in years, but 3 Men and a Baby has always been one of my favorites.
Movie. All right. What about a favorite song?
Oh gosh, I knew you were going to ask that too, and I don't know.
I
don't know if
it's... What particular music do you enjoy the most?
Country.
Country music. Okay. A favorite artist in the country?
I think I have a favorite song. It's not country, and it's not a country artist. Okay. But Ironic from Alanis Morissette has always been one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, that's an interesting song. Yeah. All right. What about a favorite meal? If you could sit down and eat a meal and don't have to worry about the calories, you don't have to worry about anything. You could just eat this. What would you enjoy?
It would either be nachos or sushi.
Okay.
Totally different, but one of those for sure.
And if you can find a restaurant that offers both, that would even be better. That would be
perfect.
Right. If you could sit down with anyone, past or present, and have a meal with them and pick their brain and just talk to them and share notes. They don't even have to be a person alive today. It could be a person who's passed away in history. But you could just sit down with them and get to know them. Who would you pick and why?
That's a hard one. I hate these kind of questions because I just don't know. This might seem kind of random, but there is background to this.
Okay.
I studied it for a while, but I think I would really like to sit down with Jane Goodall.
Okay, and why?
I'm fascinated by her research.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was a primatology major for a while.
Okay.
And so I'm just fascinated with what she learned and how she connected it to people. Yeah. That whole thing is very fascinating to me.
Right. If you were not a social worker, not in the counseling profession, and you could do another profession, what would it be?
I loved working in student affairs with college students.
Okay. Why is that? I loved
that. I think the same reason I like counseling. They're 18 to 22. They're in that very transitional stage. Yeah. What I did in particular was a lot of activities and still mental health. Yeah. But, I led alternative spring breaks, so we were volunteering. I've led orientations, just a lot of...
So if you had a job at a college and directed the student affairs, you'd love that.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes.
All right, one more question. Describe to me, and for our audience, your perfect day off.
Oh, gosh.
What do you love to do when there's nothing else to do and you could create your day off? What would it be?
I would get to drink my coffee slowly while it's still hot, and maybe
Which sounds
journal.
like it must be rare to do
yes,
that.
Very rare.
Okay.
Maybe go to a coffee shop even.
Yeah.
I used to love to do that and just read or write, walk a beach with loud waves. I love loud waves.
Okay.
Just really relaxing and by myself,
right.
Totally by myself.
Right.
Or I don't mind being in a crowded place as long as I'm by myself.
Right.
Like a busy coffee shop would be perfect.
Great. Well, thank you, Cerissa, for this time. This has been really enjoyable, and I have a lot of other questions I can continue on, so maybe we'll do it another time and get into some other areas. What's the best way for people to contact you if they would like to know a little bit more about you or follow you, or maybe they have a question, or there could be even someone listening go, wow, I live in this area and I need to get my child in possibly, or even myself, and just sit down with Cerissa and talk. What's a great way for them to contact you?
I can be contacted at Pride in North Carolina. I do have a personal website as well,
Right.
YourStoryRewritten.com.
Okay.
And that has information to get a hold of me.
Great. All right. We'll put that in the notes too for people as they check it out. Well, Cerissa, thank you again for being with us. It's a real honor.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Imperfect Leader Podcast. And before we go, let me encourage you to please share this on social media. We want your family and friends to know more about the podcast and learn along with us. If you haven't already done so, please give us a rating and leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to. It is the best gift you can give us. And remember, nothing succeeds like imperfection.